I am here, I think, in the role either of the cleanup batter or as Sam Sorba's warm-up act. And I think I better stick with just cleaning up. I'm going to do a couple of quick slides, but before I do, since there's been a lot of talk about, manhood requiring unmasking, I just like to invite the person or persons representing the SPLC to self-identify. Anybody? Are you here? Okay, if they're here and won't, well, we know what they are. If they are not here, all the better. Let's go to the video, the slides. Can we do that? There we go. I always start with this just because it helps put a little context into what we're talking about here. Reagan, back in '61, first started talking about existential threats to freedom, and that every generation has to fight them. I think you're familiar with this quote. It's sort of the mantra I live by. We've been going through a succession of these. Totalitarians, basically, with slight variations on their theories of governance or their end states, but they all basically have this in common as a central technique for coming to power. It's about silencing people. But along the trail, you intimidate, you marginalize, and then eventually you suppress to the point where there isn't any opposition. Today, these are the folks who are principally involved in this business. The smearing of people who are accused of Sharia blasphemy, which is to say giving any offense to anyone on their team. You probably recognize the symbol, the icon of the Muslim Brotherhood on the left. It is, as you've heard throughout the day, actively engaged with others in suppressing us by calling us racist and bigots and haters and, of course, Islamophobes, a completely made-up characterization. Don't go away. The guys on the right you may never have heard of, but you should be aware of them too. This is operating at the state level. The 57-member Organization of Islamic Cooperation. They call themselves states, but Palestine hasn't quite made it yet, so I think of them as members. By virtue of having a lot of oil wealth that we have insanely transferred to them, a number of these members are very powerful, and they have been working in places like the UN Human Rights Council to formalize the suppression of speech that defames Islam, that is to say, violates Sharia blasphemy. Our representative at the time was none other than Rashad Hussain, introduced by President Obama as his envoy to the OIC, as it's called, noting favorably that he is a hafiz of the Quran. That term may not mean anything to you, but it means a lot to the OIC guys. It means somebody who has memorized every word of the Quran. I kind of think of it as an indication that they're into it, you know? Anyway, he was into this idea of prohibiting defamation of Islam. And we've actually seen this beginning to manifest itself even in the United States Congress. Several of you have spoken about Charlottesville. In the aftermath of it, the Senate of the United States, without debate, approved a resolution that was subsequently approved without debate, or by the way, hearings in the House of Representatives, that essentially begins the process of codifying hate speech and bringing to bear the instruments of government to punish those who engage in it. Those white supremacists and xenophobes and neo-Nazis, mind you, not the Antifa, not the Black Lives Matter, not the others. So let me bring you to the Southern Poverty Law Center, about which much has been said already. This is the red in the red-green axis. Not the only part of it, but kind of the cueing mechanism for what the rest are doing. You've heard a good bit about it. I did want to just take a minute, since we just had a wonderful presentation about the Prager videos, to show you one that has recently been released about the SPLC. I think it's terrific. It's about 5 minutes. I'm going to yield to the video machine for the presentation by Prager University on who are these guys and what are they doing. Can we roll the videotape, gentlemen?
Shutting down people you don't agree with is about as un-American as you can get. Rigorous debate, honest discussion, open exchange of ideas, that's the American way. But free thinking and speech are threatened today by a group with a sweet-sounding name that conceals a nefarious purpose. This group is called the Southern Poverty Law Center, or SPLC. Originally founded as a civil rights law firm in 1971, the SPLC reinvented itself in the mid-'80s as a political attack group. Every year now, it produces a new list of people and charities it claims are extremists and haters. Aided by glowing coverage from the establishment media, the SPLC's hate list has become a weapon for taking individuals and groups they disagree with and tarring them with ugly associations. The SPLC employs a two-pronged strategy. First, find a handful of crazies with barely any followers, no address, and no staff, and blow them up into a dangerous movement. Proof that there are neo-Nazis lurking everywhere. On their notorious hate map, the SPLC lists 917 separate hate groups in the US. No one has even heard of more than a handful of them. The second strategy of the SPLC is to undermine legitimate political voices that they oppose by associating them with extremists like the KKK. Take the charity known as the Alliance Defending Freedom. The SPLC lists them as a hate group. Is that fair? Well, the ADF has a network of 3,000 attorneys from all across the US who've donated more than 1 million volunteer hours in defense of religious liberty. They've had a role in 49 victories at the US Supreme Court. Putting the Alliance Defending Freedom on a list with 130 Ku Klux Klan chapters is not only wrong, it's malicious. According to the SPLC, one of the most influential social scientists in the US, Charles Murray, is a, quote, white nationalist. Ayaan Hirsi Ali, perhaps the most eloquent spokesperson for the rights of Muslim women, is to the SPLC a toxic anti-Muslim extremist. Scores of other individuals and charities active in mainstream conservative or religious causes have likewise been branded by the Southern Poverty Law Center as threats to society. Mind you, it is entirely fair to disagree with any of those folks, but it is utterly unfair to call them haters or extremists. The largest category listed by the SPLC as extremists, with 623 entries, covers groups like the Tea Party organizations that are wary of centralized government. Last time we checked, favoring smaller government was a mainstream and perfectly honorable American tradition. What is not honorable is the course prescribed by a leader of the SPLC, Mark Potok, who was caught on video proclaiming the organization's true intentions. He told a group of supporters, quote, "The press will describe us as monitoring hate groups. I want to say plainly that our aim in life is to destroy these groups, to completely destroy them. Portraying someone with political views different from your own as a public menace is bullying, and it's a dangerous game. Instead of reducing hate and violence, the SPLC's name-calling directly incites it. In March 2017, Charles Murray was trying to discuss his acclaimed book, Coming Apart, at Middlebury College, when he was violently attacked by protesters inflamed by the SPLC's labeling of him as a racist. A professor escorting Murray ended up in the hospital. In 2012, a gunman attempted mass murder at the Family Research Council and failed only because the first man he shot managed to disarm him. The attacker told the police he acted because the SPLC had listed the Family Research Council as a hate group. It's a vicious irony. While promoting itself as a monitor of hate groups, the SPLC has in practice become a fomentor of hate. Yet the group rolls on, bigger than ever. What keeps them going? For one thing, the establishment media constantly quote them. Scare stories about right-wing stormtroopers are a sure way to attract eyeballs and fit nicely with the media's own preconceptions of the dangerous reactionaries lurking out there in Middle America. Second, alarmism is a great fundraising technique. Convincing people there are fascists everywhere has turned the SPLC into a cash machine. Last year, the group hustled $50 million out of frightened liberal donors, adding to the $368 million of assets they were already sitting on. So, the next time you see the Southern Poverty Law Center quoted in the news, just remember, The masterminds behind the SPLC aren't eliminating hate, they are fueling it. I'm Carl Zinsmeister for Prager University.
So why would Google want to suppress Prager University? That's pretty effective, isn't it? So back to just a couple more items here. Just yesterday, I got my latest MASH note from the SPLC in the form of a report that it circulated to Christine Brim and other donors to the SPLC, savoring what they were able to get a member of the United States Senate to do to an estimable member of the House of Representatives, Jim Bridenstine, who's been nominated by President Trump to be the next director of NASA. Jim has, God love him, appeared on my radio show 7 times, which, going back to what you just heard about associations, means he must be an anti-Muslim bigot, right? Well, this is the strategy of trying to take us down, folks, and I'm very pleased to say I don't think it's working on the nomination of Jim Bridenstine. I certainly hope not, but it is what they are about. So what can we do about this? What can, more importantly, you particularly do about it? The first thing is exercise your freedom of speech. It is like a muscle to some extent, quite apart from whether it's prohibited. If you don't, it atrophies. And if you, in fact, wind up conceding to this, back up, please, you will find yourself self-censored. There are lots of others who I think will be willing to help. It helps to be in a group. It helps to be organized. Use social media, among other things, to help take the fight to them. By exposing those who are suppressing free speech. The Southern Poverty Law Center is, as I said, been prominently focused on here today, but the ADL has gotten mostly a pass. I think there have been a couple of mentions to it. The Anti-Defamation League is no longer in the business of protecting us all, Jews most especially, against anti-Semitism. It is now just kind of the mini-me, in a way, to the SPLC with their own list of hate groups, including quite a number of us who are rather strong on Israel, by the way. The Center for American Progress, you probably know John Podesta's old operation, the Council on American Islamic Relations, also known as Hamas. The Organization of Islamic Cooperation I mentioned, Antifa, Black Lives Matter, and of course the mainstream media. As was mentioned in the video, the SPLC and all the rest of these guys, to the extent that they are endlessly cited, uncritically, not ever mentioned is the fact that they've been widely discredited. They are being promoted, they are being touted, and now it just becomes automatic that somebody can say, oh, Gaffney, he's a hater, because the SPLC says so. Countering them in this effort to impose restrictions on us starts with identifying groups like the European Union, which right now is giving Google and Facebook and Twitter and YouTube cover for silencing us by applying hate speech codes that they've adopted in Europe as a way of reaching into and circumventing or simply eliminating our First Amendment right. UN, I mentioned, the Human Rights Council, the media, the IT giants. I think Christine Brim mentioned some of this before. But now you're seeing enforcers being brought to bear. In the IT space, financial services, PayPal. Robert Spencer and Pamela Geller are among those who, for a time, were told that their funding could no longer come through those services. And not least that public law that I mentioned a moment ago. Holding them accountable, several of you have mentioned the splcexposed.org. This is a terrific site that has been set up to try to just track and counteract these guys. The rest of these you can read for yourself. I'm very pleased that Prager is taking on through litigation, but it's not an easy or cheap thing to do. Some favor boycotts, mostly they're aimed at us, but I commend them to you as an option. And not least, if members of Congress are not going to stand up to this, they should be primaried. Let's do it. Finally, Challenging these false narratives with respect to people who are being targeted is a very important thing that you can do. Just not let people get away with this character assassination and smearing. In classrooms, as we heard earlier, on campuses especially, but also just in the public square. If you endorse the vilified, it makes it that much more difficult for people to get away with doing it, full stop. And if nothing else, support those of us who are in this fight. If you can't figure out something else to do, it will make a material difference and contribution. And I personally thank you.